Hello and welcome to Bite My Pie. When browsing the internet, it doesn't usually take long to run into an advert or two. Unfortunately, some of these can be quite obtrusive, even obstructing the content you're trying to view. What if there was a way to block these annoyances? That's where Pi-hole comes in. Perhaps not the nicest of names, but deploying this software on even a tiny Raspberry Pi can be highly effective. And not just on one device, but your entire home network. Removing pesky ads has the added benefit of speeding up your internet browsing. In this video we'll look at how the process works, go step by step through the installation and setup, then see how to get the most out of it when it's up and running. So if this sounds appealing to you, stick around. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that a lot of websites use advertising as a way of generating money for their creators, which is how they can provide the content for free. So if you intend to block this advertising, please consider alternative ways in which to support your favourite sites. For example, some sites offer the facility to make a donation. Okay, with that said, let's begin. To understand how Pi-hole works, we need to first familiarise ourselves with a fundamental part of how the internet operates. Unlike people, computers don't understand words. Instead, they use a number-based system you've probably heard of called binary. This is because, at its most basic level, electricity has just two states, on or off, which are represented by the binary numbers 1 and 0 respectively. When you're perusing the internet, you may type in a web address, say google.com for example. To reach Google's servers, the address you type needs to be converted into a special kind of number called an IP address in order to be directed to its destination. And to carry out this conversion, the internet is populated with what are known as DNS servers. You can think of these as telephone directories for the web, translating website names into their corresponding IP addresses. Now that we know the typical function of a DNS server, let's take a look at Pi-hole. Described by the project as a black hole for internet advertisements, the software acts as a kind of local DNS server on your home network. As once configured, DNS requests from your devices will pass through this before being routed to an upstream or internet-based DNS server. When visiting a website, although you head to the domain, say mysupersite.com for example, as it loads, the web page will often pull in additional content from other sources. This can be for useful things like images and embedded videos, but it can also be for adverts or worse. Pi-hole keeps an updated list of common addresses that contain this undesirable content. So when you visit a website, most of the undesirable content never reaches your home network, let alone your computer. Okay, let's begin the setup. Despite the name, you can install Pi-hole on most computers running the Linux operating system, but for this video I'm going to stick with the Raspberry Pi. So the first thing we need to do is go grab an operating system. In this case it makes sense to use the official Raspberry Pi OS. Let's open a web browser and head to www.raspberrypi.org/downloads. As I'm on a Windows computer, I'm going to download the Raspberry Pi Imager for Windows and save that to my downloads directory. When that's complete, we can close the web browser. And now let's open File Explorer and find the application we just downloaded. Right, we can double click on it to launch the install wizard. Click on Yes to proceed. Then click on Install to begin the installation. And when it's complete, click on Finish. Okay, let's close File Explorer out of the way. And here we have the Raspberry Pi Imager. If you've not done so already, connect the microSD card you're going to use in the Raspberry Pi to your computer. And then select Choose OS. From here we're going to click on Raspberry Pi OS Other. And for this project I recommend using Raspberry Pi OS Lite, as it tells us this has no desktop environment. In other words, there's no pretty GUI, it's a command line interface which in Linux is known as the terminal. Now if this really puts you off, you could go back and install the recommended desktop option at the top. But as you'll see, Pi-hole really doesn't need this and is very easy to install anyway. Also, once it's installed, you'll be accessing it through a web interface, so this really only affects the installation. Right, so select your preferred option and let's continue. Next we need to click on Choose SD card, and from here you can select your micro SD card. As you can see, mine's 32 gigabytes, but 16 would be plenty. So let's select that, and with that done we can click on Write. It gives us a warning that anything on the micro SD card will be erased, so make sure there's nothing important on there that you want to keep. And when you're happy to continue, click Yes. This will take a little while, so let's speed up the video. Great, now that it's complete, click Continue and remove the micro SD card from your computer. And now that that's done, we can close the program. I'll be using a Raspberry Pi 4, but Pi-hole should work just as well on a previous generation Pi 3. While it's possible to remote into your Raspberry Pi for the setup, the easiest way is to attach a keyboard and monitor. I'd also suggest connecting it directly to your router with a network cable. Note, once we've got everything up and running, you'll be able to disconnect the peripherals and leave the Pi permanently attached to your router, doing its job silently in the background. So with that said, let's power on. When the Pi first boots, it'll resize the file system so that it fills the entire micro SD card. After a restart, it will then continue to load the operating system until it reaches the login prompt. We need to log in with the username Pi and the password Raspberry. Now let's clear the screen by typing the word clear and pressing enter. If you opted to install the full Raspberry Pi OS desktop, you need to open the terminal to follow along with installing Pi-hole. For security, the first thing we want to do is change the Pi's default password. To do this, simply type the command PASSWD and press enter. Then type in the current password, which is Raspberry, and press enter again. And now type in your new password and press enter. Then just confirm it and press enter again. Now that that's done, let's clear the screen once more, and we're ready to install Pi-hole. The project's website has what's referred to as a one-step automated install. This is by far the easiest way to install it, as it only involves typing a single line into the terminal. However, since this requires root or admin privileges, there is an element of trust involved, not knowing what it's actually going to do. Blindly running some random command off the internet could be seen as either brave or foolish, depending on your point of view. So if you'd like to investigate precisely what the command entails, you can type part of it into a web browser to view the code first. So here I am back on my PC in Google Chrome, and if I type the address https://install.pi-hole.net into my browser, here we can see the script that running the command on the Pi is going to execute. So feel free to view that at your leisure. If a page of computer code might as well be written in Latin for all the sense it makes, don't worry. Running a random command in the terminal is certainly no worse than downloading and then installing an exe file from the internet in Windows. In fact, you should apply the same precautions. In other words, make sure the website in question is authentic and trustworthy, not some unknown site no one has ever heard of. For example, in the same way that you know Microsoft.com is a genuine respectable website, you can no doubt guess that Uncle Fester's ShadyDeals.com is probably best avoided. Since we know that pi-hole.net is a legitimate site, you should consider it safe to proceed. And with the security considerations taken into account, it's time to install Pi-hole. Okay, so let's enter the command on our Pi. It's curl space dash lowercase s capital L space https://install.pi-hole.net space pipe space bash. If you're curious, curl is a Linux command for transferring data over a network. In this case, downloading the script from the website address install.pi-hole.net. The symbol known as a pipe simply uses the output of the first part of the command, the script, as the input of the second part, which is bash. And bash is a shell or command line interpreter that is used to run the script. Right, now that that's cleared up, let's press enter to execute the command. Although I didn't run the command using sudo to gain admin rights, the script itself will do this. Indeed, if you're installing Pi-hole on something other than a Raspberry Pi, you'll most likely be prompted to enter your password. Here we have a message informing us that the installer will transform our device into a network-wide ad blocker, which is exactly what we want. So let's press enter to continue. Since this is a free and open source project, it's letting us know where we can make a donation. So press enter to continue again. As it tells us, Pi-hole requires a static IP address to work correctly. This can be configured manually in the next section, which is what we'll do here. Or you could reserve an IP address on your router if you prefer. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, feel free to check out another one of my videos entitled Static IP, Beginner's Guide to Setting Up Static and Reserved IP Addresses on a Home Network. I've put a link in the description. Okay, so let's hit enter to continue. If you recall, I mentioned earlier that Pi-hole operates as a kind of local DNS server for your home network. So here we need to choose who we'd like to use for our upstream or internet-based DNS server, which is where Pi-hole will route our website or domain name lookups to. By using the cursor keys on your keyboard, you can highlight one of the entries, or you can even enter your own custom address. I'm going to go with OpenDNS, but feel free to pick your own, and then press enter to select it. As I also mentioned earlier, Pi-hole uses lists of the undesirable contents addresses in order to block ads, so I'm going to leave both of those selected. If you press the tab key on your keyboard, that will highlight OK, and then you can press enter to continue. You may not even be using IPv6, but it doesn't hurt to leave both of these selected. So press tab and enter again to continue. Now if you're happy to set the IP address that is shown on screen as your static address, you can simply select yes. But if, like me, you want to manually enter your own, pick no instead. If I move along the line and delete the 50, I'm going to replace it with 254 and then press enter to select it. It's automatically detected the default gateway, which is the IP address of your router, so press enter to select that. If you watch my static IP video, or you're already familiar with home IP addresses, you may have noticed that my router is at the beginning of my IP range and Pi-hole is at the end. This should make it easy to remember. When you've confirmed your settings are correct, hit enter to select yes. It gives you the option to turn off the web admin interface, but this would make Pi-hole much more difficult to administer, which is why it's recommended to leave it on. So I'm going to press enter to continue. In order to have a web interface, you need a web server. Handily, Pi-hole will install one for us. As the name suggests, LightTPD is a very lightweight web server, but it's more than up to the task of managing our ad blocker. So I'm going to leave that one on as well and press enter to continue. Okay, so by default, Pi-hole will keep a log of queries, in other words, the internet browsing that's happening on your network. It's up to you, but I'd suggest leaving this on as it can be helpful, particularly if you ever need to carry out a spot of troubleshooting. When you've made your selection, hit enter to continue. Here you can select the level of detail you want to see in your Pi-hole statistics. To check out what each one entails, visit the web page shown on screen. There's a link in the video description. I'm going to leave it on show everything and again press enter to continue. Now that we've input our chosen settings, Pi-hole will carry out the installation proper. So let's hurry things along a bit. Right, as you can see, the installation is now complete. I guess the developers are fans of Star Trek. As it tells us, we now need to configure our devices to use Pi-hole as their DNS server, which we'll look at shortly. For now, if you haven't already, make a note of Pi-hole's IPv4 address. Also jot down the web interface addresses. It's worth noting both the host name and IP address. Lastly, if you intend to use the admin web page login password that Pi-hole has generated for you, make a note of this. But if, like me, you'd sooner set your own, you won't need it. And with that done, select OK. After any substantial installation, it's advisable to carry out a restart. And we can do that by typing sudo space reboot and pressing enter. From the login prompt, let's log back in. Then I'm going to clear my screen. So to reset Pi-hole's web interface admin password, we need to type the following command, which is Pi-hole space -a space -p and press enter. Then you need to type in your new password and press enter again. Then type it once more and press enter to confirm it. In order to update Raspberry Pi OS and Pi-hole, it's easiest to be able to access your Pi remotely. For this to work, we need to turn on some software known as an SSH server. You can find this in the Pi's config menu, which can be accessed by typing sudo space raspi-config. From here we need to use the cursor keys to go down to number 5, interfacing options, and select that. And then we're going to choose P2 SSH. Use your left cursor key to highlight yes and then press enter. And now that that's enabled, press enter again. With that done, I'm going to press the escape key on my keyboard to exit out of there. Then I can log out of my Pi by typing exit and pressing enter. With the installation complete, you can disconnect the keyboard and monitor and leave the Raspberry Pi permanently powered on beside your router. Before we look at configuring our devices to use Pi-hole, let's first make sure it's working and familiarise ourselves with the interface. So we access it through a web browser. This can be from any device on your home network. You may be able to access it at http://pi.hole/admin. But if that doesn't work, as is the case here, use the IP address instead, in my case 192.168.0.254 with the admin on the end again. Great, so we get some statistics here on the home page. Obviously there's not a lot going on at the moment because I'm not routing any traffic through it. So let's log in to our Pi-hole. You'll need the admin web page login password that you made a note of earlier. And when you've entered that, you can click login. As you can see, we've now got a whole list of options available to us. So this main screen is called the dashboard. We'll come back and look at the query logs and long-term data when I've carried out a few searches. You have an allowed or whitelist and a blocked or blacklist. I'll demonstrate their potential use in a little bit. You can add your own local DNS records. This could be useful if you want to associate a particular domain with an IP address. Group management is probably more useful if you're a business or part of a large organisation. Add lists may be useful though if you'd like to add another source from which to acquire an additional list of blocked domains. You can see here the two that were provided during Pi-hole's installation. The disable section is a nice touch. If for any reason you want to either temporarily or indefinitely disable Pi-hole, you can do so in here. Tools is where you can access things like log files. There's also this handy update gravity section. As it tells us on screen, we can update the list of blocked domains. So just click on the large update bar to do so. Next down we have settings. A lot of the options in here are items that we configured during the setup. On the System tab you get some useful options. You can even power off or restart your Raspberry Pi from here. Being able to flush the network table and restart the DNS resolver are useful troubleshooting steps if Pi-hole's not behaving in the way that you expect. You can view Pi-hole's DNS settings. Remember that I set Open DNS, so if I wanted to change that, I could do so in here. Pi-hole can even function as a DHCP server if you had a need for that. If you're a fan of dark themes, you'll find one in the API web interface section. Just select it and then click Save. I'll change that back because it might not be so easy to see on the video. If you want to alter any of the privacy settings you set earlier, you can do so on the Privacy tab. And then Teleporter is where you can back up and restore your configuration, which if you've spent a lot of time setting Pi-hole up exactly as you want it, is a very good idea. Then we have the Logout button, the facility to donate to the project, and a link to documentation if you get stuck. I like the little status section at the top left as it gives us a quick look at things like the temperature of our Raspberry Pi and the load being placed on it. Okay, let's start routing some traffic through Pi-hole. If you want to block ads on all of the devices on your home network, you need to make the change on your router. And to do this, you first need to know the IP address of your router. On a Windows PC, we can find this by typing cmd to open the command prompt, and then typing ipconfig and pressing enter, as this shows us the default gateway, which is the IP address of your router. So make a note of that, close the command prompt and open a web browser. And then we're going to type that IP address into the address bar. So in my case, that's 192.168.0.1. And after hitting enter, you should be presented with your router's login screen. So pop in your login credentials. If you don't know what these are, you should be able to find them on the back of the router itself, and then click login. Now routers do vary from model to model, but you're looking for the section that enables you to set the DNS server. It could well be in the same place as the DHCP server settings. For example, on this router, I know that that's under the administration tab if I just scroll down a little bit. Here we have the preferred DNS server and the alternative DNS server. I'm going to enter the IP address of my Raspberry Pi as the preferred DNS server, so that's 192.168.0.254. Enter yours in here, and since I don't want an alternative DNS server, I'm going to remove that entry, and then I can click OK to apply those changes. And simple as that, we can now log out of the router. But let's say we don't want every device to be subject to all that filtering. Let's now look at how to route just a single device through our ad blocking Pi-hole. In this scenario, we wouldn't change anything on our router. Instead, we make the changes on an individual device. So let's say I want to apply ad blocking to this Windows 10 computer. To do this, we first need to go to the Start menu and select Settings. From here, select Network and Internet. Now you need to select your network adapter type. I know that I'm connecting over Wi-Fi, but yours may be Ethernet if you've got a cable plugged in. And then we can click on Change Adapter Options. Then right click on the network adapter that you're using to connect to the internet. And on the context menu that appears, select Properties. From here, click on TCP IPv4 and then choose Properties again. Now we can select the radio button for use the following DNS server addresses, and then just as we looked at when doing this on a router, we need to enter our preferred DNS server here. So once again, that's the IP address of your Pi-hole, in my case 192.168.0.254. And again, I'm going to leave the alternate DNS server entry blank, then click on OK and select Close. At this point you may want to restart your computer to make sure that the changes are applied. And that's how we block ads on our Windows 10 machine using Pi-hole. Obviously you could do this individually to multiple devices on your network. Note that on some of them you may have to set up a static IP address in order to change their DNS settings. Right, having done a little bit of internet browsing off camera, I've returned to Pi-hole's web interface so that we can look at the difference now that it's handled some traffic. Straight away, even before we log in, you can see the number of queries and how many of those have been blocked, which also gives us a percentage. So let's log in and see what's going on. I'll pop in my password to do so. On the dashboard we get some visual indications, which if you hover over them you get more information. If we scroll down, there's some very useful info. So here we can see a list of top permitted domains. I visited sites like eBay and Amazon and Google, and you can see that those have been allowed through. But you can also see that the corresponding ads, such as Google Ads and adservice.google.com, haven't. Let's scroll back up and have a look at the query logs. Here we get a list of all of the DNS addresses that have passed through Pi-hole. We can see the date and time that they were accessed, and also the IP address of the device that was requesting them. Long-term data will obviously be more useful the longer you use Pi-hole. Nevertheless, let's have a quick look in graphics. So if I click to select a date and time range, let's go with today, you get a visual graph of the number of queries over a period of time. Let's do the same thing in top lists. So again, if I click to select a date and time range of today, as the name suggests, top lists shows the top domains, top block domains and top clients. So at a glance you can quickly see the top websites being visited, the domains being blocked the most often, and the IP addresses of the devices on your network responsible for the most traffic. You'll also start to quickly see how much activity is going on behind the scenes. For example, I didn't visit ABE Books, and yet data from this site has been requested. Next, let's look at the whitelist. If you happen to find that a website you could previously access is suddenly being blocked, rather than disabling Pi-hole, you can add the domain of said site into here and then add it to the whitelist. If on the other hand you wanted to block a website from being accessed on your home network, you can add its domain to the blacklist. I'm going to enter facebook.com as an example. You can optionally add a comment if you so wish, and then add the entry to the blacklist. Let's open a new tab in the browser and see if I can now get to Facebook. And just like that, my privacy is restored. While we've got a web browser tab open, let's go and have a look at a website to see what happens when the ads are removed. So just as an example, let's visit cnet.com. As you can see, we've got this white space along the top where there'd usually be an ad banner. So just to demonstrate that, let's return to Pi-hole and temporarily disable ads, let's say for 10 seconds. And if we go back and do a refresh, there we go, the ads are back. Right, let's close that browser tab and return to Pi-hole's blacklist. If we wanted to, then we could use this list as a kind of web filter, building up a list of website domains that we want to block from our home network. Just remember that in order for this to work, the devices you want to impact will need to be routed through Pi-hole, which isn't an issue if you've done this on your router. So there we have the Pi-hole web interface. Now before we finish, I'd like to show you how to update both the Pi-hole software itself and the Raspberry Pi operating system. To do both of these things, we first need to connect to our Raspberry Pi. Remember, we turned on the Pi's SSH server so that it would accept remote connections. And in Windows 10 we can now connect to this straight from the command prompt. To do this, type SSH space the user account of the Raspberry Pi, which is just Pi, @ and then the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, which for me is 192.168.0.254. Then press enter. Because this is the first time connecting remotely, we need to type yes to continue and then enter the password for your Raspberry Pi. Right, let's clear the screen. Let's first update Pi-hole with the command Pi-hole space -up and then press enter to run it. Since that's all up to date, let's make sure that our Raspberry Pi is as well. This is two commands. The first is sudo space apt space update, and again press enter to execute it. And then the second command is sudo space apt space upgrade, and press enter once more. Type Y to continue, again followed by enter. I'll pause the video and come back when it's complete. And there we have it, an up-to-date Pi. After installing any updates, it's worth rebooting to make sure that they get applied, and we can do that with a simple sudo space reboot. And that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you now feel better prepared to take on those pesky advertisements, and that you can see how with query logging and domain blocking facilities, Pi-hole can also provide you with far greater control over your home network. Just don't forget to spare a thought for the web developers and content creators whose livelihood may be impacted by ad blocking, and consider supporting them in other ways. After all, everyone's got to eat. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when I post the next one, just click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.